He never wanted anything to do with children. Not their laughter, not their cries, not even their innocent little smiles. To Adrian Cole, children were not blessings, they were burdens, and he despised them with a seriousness that chilled anyone who heard him speak about the subject. Microphone hash, hello my beautiful listeners. Welcome to today's story. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so you never miss another story. And tell me in the comments, do you think a man can truly live happily without ever having children or family? He had built his entire life around avoiding them. He never attended birthdays. He ignored his relatives who had kids, and when women spoke of marriage, he listened politely but always shut the conversation down with one sentence: I will never be a father. It wasn't a debate. It was a declaration. Adrian's hatred was not born from ignorance. It was born from pain. His mother had died the very day he was born. He never saw her face, never heard her laugh. Instead, he grew up with a grieving, bitter father who never forgave him for surviving. You killed her. His father used to hiss after too many drinks. Because of you, she's gone. Those words carved themselves into Adrian's soul like blades. From that day on, children to him were destroyers. They stole mothers, ruined lives, and left only misery behind. And so Adrian Cole made a vow. He would never marry, never have a child, and never allow one under his roof. He was a billionaire who had everything, except a family, and he swore it would remain that way. Adrian's mansion stood like a fortress on the edge of the city. Vast, cold, and intimidating, it reflected the man who lived inside it. Every corner of the house screamed wealth, marble floors, towering chandeliers, priceless art, but it lacked one thing: warmth. The silence of the mansion was broken only by the quiet footsteps of Grace, his housemaid. Grace was a black woman in her 30s, soft-spoken but strong, who had been with Adrian for years. She was the only person he trusted enough to live under the same roof. She knew better than to mention children in his presence. Once, a visiting cousin had brought her toddler to the house, and Adrian had nearly thrown them both out. From that day, Grace made sure no child came near the estate. Adrian worked late nights, ate alone, and buried himself in business deals. The world called him successful, but behind closed doors, he was a man shackled by fear and bitterness. And Grace, though she served him faithfully, often wondered how long a man could live in a mansion built on emptiness. Grace had seen the way Adrian flinched whenever children appeared on television, or how his jaw tightened when he passed by schools. To others, he was arrogant. To her, he was broken. Sometimes, she tried to lighten the mood. "So," she said one evening as she cleared the dining table, "don't you ever feel lonely in this big house?" Adrian didn't even look up from his glass of wine. Lonely people are those who need others to feel alive. "I don't." Grace sighed. He spoke like a man who believed his own lie. She never pushed further, but in her heart she whispered prayers for him. Because deep inside, she knew no human was meant to live without love. And sooner or later, life had a way of forcing even the coldest heart to soften. It began on a rainy night. Grace was finishing her chores when she heard it, soft knocking at the front gate. Strange. No one came to Adrian's house uninvited. She went outside and found something she never expected: a baby, wrapped in a thin blanket, placed carefully on the doorstep. The rain had already soaked through the cloth. The child whimpered, weak and helpless. Grace's heart stopped. She looked around, but the street was empty. Whoever left the baby was long gone. She bent down, scooped up the infant, and whispered, "Oh Lord, whose child is this?" In that moment, she faced a choice: wake Adrian immediately and risk his fury, or keep the child hidden. Her instincts won. She carried the baby inside through the back entrance and promised herself she would figure out the rest tomorrow. Grace laid the baby in a basket lined with towels and stared at him in shock. He had Adrian's eyes. She shook her head. Impossible. But the resemblance was undeniable. The next morning, Adrian noticed Grace looked tired. "You're slower than usual," he muttered. "I didn't sleep well," she replied carefully, hiding her anxiety. Every cry of the baby made her heart race. She hushed him quickly, praying Adrian wouldn't hear. But as the days passed, hiding became harder. Finally, one evening, Adrian's sharp ears caught it, a faint wail echoing from the maid's quarters. His face darkened. "What is that sound?" he demanded. Grace froze. The moment she feared had come. Adrian burst into the maid's room. There, on the bed, lay the baby. Tiny, fragile, innocent. His face twisted in rage. "What is this?" he thundered. "Grace, what have you done?" She bowed her head, trembling. "Sir, I found him at the gate. I couldn't leave him to die." "Get rid of it." Adrian roared. "I told you, no children in this house." Tears welled in Grace's eyes. "He's just a baby, sir. He has no one." Adrian's fist clenched. The sight of the child tore open wounds he thought were buried forever. "Out! Take it away before I do it myself." But Grace did not move. For the first time, she stood firm against him. "No, sir," she whispered. "This child, he belongs here, more than you know." Adrian froze, his chest rising and falling heavily as his eyes landed on the baby once again. Grace's words echoed in the air. "This child, he belongs here, more than you know." "What do you mean by that?" he demanded, his voice low but dangerous. Grace hesitated, then gently lifted the infant and turned him toward Adrian. "Sir, look at him. Really look." Adrian tried to resist, but his gaze betrayed him. For the first time, he studied the child's face. The curve of the nose, the delicate chin, the way the gray eyes blinked up at him, wide and innocent. His breath caught in his throat. "No," he muttered, stumbling back a step. "That's not possible." Grace's voice softened. "Blood cannot deny itself. Sir, I think is yours." Adrian's heart pounded. Memories rushed back, years ago, before his empire, before the walls he built around himself. There had been one woman, a fleeting encounter, one night he dismissed as meaningless. He had never looked back. But what if that night had left behind more than just a memory? Adrian shook his head violently. "No, I will not accept this. It's a trick. Some desperate woman probably abandoned him here to trap me." Grace's steady gaze never wavered. "Then why do his eyes look like yours, sir? Why does he calm when you step closer?" Adrian clenched his fists, torn between fury and a fear he didn't want to name. For the first time in years, he wasn't certain of anything. That night, Adrian couldn't sleep. He paced the mansion, his thoughts drowning him. The baby's cries seemed to echo down the corridors, even when Grace soothed him. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring at the amber liquid as if it could drown his memories. His mind drifted back to his father, the man who had raised him with bitterness, blaming him for a death he never caused. "Children destroy," his father's voice rang in his ears. "They steal love, they steal peace, they ruin everything." Adrian slammed the glass down so hard it cracked. He pressed his palms into the desk, breathing heavily. Was his father right? Or had he lived his whole life carrying a lie? Meanwhile, Grace sat rocking the baby in her small room, whispering prayers into the night. She knew Adrian's wounds ran deep, but she also believed wounds could heal. And perhaps this child was the key. She looked down at the infant and whispered, "Daniel, that's your name, and I believe God brought you here for a reason." The baby cooed softly, as if agreeing. Adrian tried to stay away from the child, but the mansion made it impossible. Daniel's tiny presence seemed to seep into every corner. One afternoon, Adrian passed the living room and saw Grace play with a boy on the rug. Daniel laughed, a sound so pure it pierced through Adrian like a blade. He froze at the doorway, unwilling to step in, yet unable to turn away. Grace noticed him. "He has your smile, sir," she said gently. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Don't start this again." But he didn't leave. He stood there, watching Daniel clap his little hands, his laughter filling the silence of the house. Adrian's chest tightened with something unfamiliar, something he didn't want to admit was longing. Later that night, Adrian sat in his study, staring at a photograph of his mother. For the first time, he wondered, if she had lived, would she have loved him? Would she have shown him that children weren't curses but gifts? Taze pricked his eyes, but he shoved them away. "No," he told himself. "I can't. I won't." Yet deep down, a war had begun inside him. It happened unexpectedly. Adrian was walking down the hallway, lost in thought, when a small figure crawled across his path. He stopped. Daniel looked up at him, gray eyes wide and sparkling, then reached out with tiny fingers. Adrian's throat tightened. "Move him!" He barked at Grace, who had rushed behind. But before she could, Daniel let out a squeal of laughter and tugged at Adrian's pant leg. Something inside Adrian shattered. Against his own will, he bent down, hesitated, then scooped the child into his arms. Daniel giggled, clutching his shirt with surprising strength. Adrian froze. The warmth of the tiny body press against his chest sent shockwaves through him. Grace's eyes widened. She held her breath, afraid to break the moment. Adrian muttered, almost to himself, "Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous." Yet he didn't put Daniel down. He stood there, motionless, holding the very thing he had sworn to hate. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel anger. He felt something else. From that day on, something began to shift. Adrian didn't admit it, but the walls he had built were cracking. Daniel would reach for him whenever he walked by. At first, Adrian resisted, but slowly, almost reluctantly, he began to respond. A finger offered, a hand held, a moment lingered. One morning, Daniel refused to eat unless Adrian fed him. Grace expected Adrian to snap, but instead, he sighed, sat down, and awkwardly offered a spoon. Daniel grinned with triumph, smearing porridge all over his father's shirt. Adrian groaned, but Grace caught the faintest smile tugging at his lips. The mansion was changing. The cold, echoing silence was gone. In its place were giggles, little footsteps, and the gentle hum of lullabies sung by Grace. And Adrian, though still guarded, was no longer the man who slammed doors at the sound of a child's cry. Something in him was waking up. Grace stood by the nursery door late into the night, watching Adrian do something she never thought possible. He was cradling Daniel, humming an old tune under his breath, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them. Her heart swelled with a mix of pride and fear. Pride, because she had witnessed the impossible, a man who hated children slowly learning to love one. Fear, because Adrian still hadn't fully accepted the truth. He hadn't acknowledged Daniel as his son, not out loud. Grace knew her place in his mansion. She was just a maid, the caregiver. But deep in her heart, she also knew something else. She loved Daniel as though he were her own. And maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to feel something for the man who once terrified her. Still, she reminded herself, don't cross the line, Grace. Don't dream where you have no right. But dreams, she would soon learn, are not so easy to silence. Adrian had avoided the public eye with Daniel, but one Saturday morning, Grace suggested fresh air might do the baby good. Surprisingly, Adrian agreed. They drove to a quiet park on the outskirts of the city. Grace carried a picnic basket while Adrian pushed the stroller, awkwardly, but with a sense of duty. People stared. Whispers followed them. "Is that Adrian Cole?" someone murmured. "The billionaire with a child." Adrian's jaw tightened, but when Daniel reached up with chubby hands and laughed at the fluttering leaves, Adrian forgot the eyes around him. For a moment, it was just him, the child, and Grace's gentle smile. They sat under a tree, sharing sandwiches. Grace laughed when Adrian clumsily tried to feed Daniel a piece of bread, only to have it spat back at him. Adrian groaned. "He's impossible." Grace shook her head. "He's perfect. You just don't know him yet." Adrian looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, he realized Grace wasn't just his maid. She was the glue holding everything together. But with affection came fear. That night, Adrian found himself staring at his reflection in the mirror, anger rising in his chest. This is dangerous, he thought. I'm losing control. He remembered his father's bitter face, the warnings, the hatred. Children ruin lives, Adrian. They took your mother from me, and one day they'll take everything from you. Adrian slammed his fist against the sink. He couldn't let history repeat itself. He couldn't allow himself to be vulnerable. Grace heard the noise and rushed to the hallway. She found Adrian leaning heavily against the wall, his face pale. "Sir," she whispered, "go back to bed." He barked, but his voice trembled, and his eyes betrayed a war she couldn't see. Grace wanted to reach out, but she stopped herself. For now, all she could do was wait, and pray that the man trapped inside his own shadows would one day step into the light. The turning point came unexpectedly. Daniel woke in the middle of the night, crying louder than ever before. Grace rushed to the nursery, but Adrian was already there, holding the boy against his chest. "He won't stop," Adrian muttered, panic in his voice. Grace stepped closer, her hand brushing his as she adjusted Daniel in his arms. The contact sent a jolt through both of them. "Sure," Grace whispered, rocking Daniel gently. "He's not just crying. He's scared. Babies feel what we feel." Adrian swallowed hard. "So he feels me?" "Yes," she said softly. "And right now, you're scared too." Their eyes locked. In that fragile silence, Adrian realized Grace understood him in ways no one else ever had. And Grace realized the feelings were no longer hidden. They were written in every look, every word, every heartbeat. For the first time, Adrian whispered, "Daniel." His voice cracked. "He's really mine, isn't he?" Grace nodded, tears glistening. "Yes, and he needs you, sir, more than you know." The following days were different. Adrian no longer avoided Daniel. He sought him out. He began to feed him without being asked, carried him through the halls, even let the boy tug at his expensive ties until they were ruined. Grace watched in awe. She had seen miracles before, but none quite like this. Adrian had spent weeks adjusting to life with Daniel, but the outside world was never far behind. One morning, the front page of the city's biggest paper carried a headline that made his blood run cold. "Billionaire Adrian Cole seen with baby and mysterious woman. Secret family." Grace froze when she saw it. Her hands trembled as she held the paper, terrified of what Adrian might say. But Adrian didn't rage. He didn't slam doors. Instead, he took a deep breath, folded the newspaper, and said they were bound to find out eventually. Grace blinked in shock. "You're not angry?" Adrian shook his head. "For the first time in my life, I don't care what they say. Let them speculate. Let them wonder. All that matters is Daniel, and you." Grace's heart skipped. Did he mean that? Was she really part of the all that matters? The media storm grew, but inside the mansion, something stronger was growing too, a bond no rumor could break. It happened on a rainy evening. Thunder rolled over the mansion as Grace tried to calm Daniel, who was restless from the storm. Adrian entered the nursery, his hair damp from the rain. Without a word, he sat beside her and took Daniel into his arms. To her astonishment, Daniel instantly calmed. Grace smiled softly. "He feels safe with you." Adrian looked down at the child, then at her. "4 years, I thought children only brought pain. But Daniel is teaching me otherwise." Their eyes lingered in the dim glow of the night light. Something unspoken passed between them, powerful and undeniable. "Grace," Adrian whispered, his voice lower than she had ever heard it, "I don't know what I'd do without you." The words broke something inside her. Tears welled up as she whispered back, "You'll never have to find out." In that moment, walls that had stood for decades crumbled. For the first time in his life, Adrian leaned into warmth instead of away from it. Weeks later, Adrian received a call that would change everything. A woman, Daniel's biological mother, had been found. She was gravely ill, unable to care for him, and she confirmed what Grace had suspected all along. Daniel was indeed Adrian's son. The truth shook him, but instead of running, Adrian stood firm. When the courts asked if he wanted custody, Adrian didn't hesitate. "Here's my son," he said firmly. "I will raise him." Grace's eyes filled with tears as she sat in the courtroom, Daniel sleeping against her shoulder. She had never seen Adrian so sure, so strong. Afterward, as they left the courthouse, Adrian turned to Grace. "I couldn't have done this without you. You're not just his caretaker, Grace. You're his mother in every way that matters." Her breath caught. She had dreamed of hearing those words, but never believed she would. The mansion was no longer silent. Laughter filled the halls. Tiny footsteps echoed across marble floors, and the man who once despised children now lived for one. On Daniel's first birthday, Adrian hosted a small celebration, not for the cameras, not for society, but for family. Grace baked the cake herself. Daniel smashed it with tiny hands, and Adrian laughed until tears filled his eyes. As the evening quieted and Daniel fell asleep in Grace's arms, Adrian walked to her side. For a moment, he simply watched them, his son and the woman who had changed everything. Then he spoke, voice steady but full of emotion. "Grace, you didn't just bring Daniel into my life. You brought me back to life. I thought I could live without love, but I was wrong. I need you. Both of you." Grace's eyes widened, her heart pounding. "So?" He took her hand gently. "Not so. Not anymore. Just Adrian. And if you allow it, I want us to be more than what we are now. I want us to be a family." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes." In that moment, the man who had sworn never to love a child found himself holding the greatest love of all. Not just as a father, not just as a billionaire, but as a man who finally understood what it meant to be whole. And so, in the mansion once filled with silence, love took root, and it was louder than anything Adrian Cole had ever known.